Melissa, if you could hit record, then I'll do my spiel. All right, this is the full board meeting for CSS Workforce New York, December 10th. Present on the board, we have AJ Kircher, Bill Caudle, Bruce Boughton, Tim Driscoll, Ernie Hartman, Jack Wheeler, Jim Griffin, Jamie Johnson, Jeannie Eschbach, Josh Michael, Judy McKinney-Cherry, Liz Stamp, Margaret Lawrence, Michael Mishhook, Nancy Kirby. So we do have quorum at 15. In addition, we have guests of Shelley Madden, operator, Sally Rasu, Pro Action. We have staff present, myself, Daniel Porter, Melissa Johnson, Phyllis Ballier, and I think I just heard someone else beep in on it, but I don't know who that was. But Jack, the meeting is yours under quorum.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all. So we called the meeting to order. Conflicts of interest, as always, if you or your organization have a conflict with any item, please note it when it comes up. Meeting minutes of October 22nd. Looking for approval if there's no questions.
Jamie, I'll move them.
This is Judy. I'll second them.
Motion second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Board chair report, board membership. Dan, do you want to talk about our needs?
Sure. So we are really lagging on 2 private sector positions. We're going to have to put a full court press on here before we find ourselves in trouble with the state on this. Specifically 2 private sector folks, Chemung and Schuyler County representatives. So I will, beginning next week, I will be probably calling each and every one of the board members and kind of digging into your networks and seeing if you have recommendations and getting rolling on this through the holidays. But this is something we really, really need to do, particularly on the private sector side of the house. So if you've got someone now and you want to shoot them or share them or have an initial conversation and then make a referral, however, but again, I will be doing a full court press starting next week on that. Do you want me to go into budget too, Jack, and kind of move through this, or do you want to?
Yes. Yep. Let's go to the November 2020 budget. Thank you.
So November 2020 budget. This is because we're so early in the month of December. This is as close to where we're going to be at this point. There's still some things, and I'll kind of point them out as we go through that we're moving. So November represents, as you can see up here, about 42% of the way through the year. So looking at this column right here, you want to be looking for numbers in here, particularly on these yellows around the 42% through. So when you look at total personnel, you see we're a touch under on salary lines right now, but not materially. We are what looks to be way behind on fringes, but for the exec committee, you'll remember at exec last week, we were at about 15%. You can see it 20% now. It's end of the year. It's a lot of closing out timing after the first of the year when all the health stuff comes due. You'll see that number go up and we'll rapidly catch up in that subcategory. Under operating expenses, you can see here on the utilities, they've dropped some a little bit because we're cost sharing them out. The rent is a little bit high. We've not gotten to the measurements there yet. Other categories, dues and membership, we look to be pretty high on that rate at the moment. We're waiting on 2 more memberships to pay, and then we'll close out the year there. Outreach, where there's been some conversation around outreach, you can see we have about $10,000 left in this budget. When we talk a little bit about I-86 later, you'll see we'll kind of be combining forces on some of that, plus outreach to dislocated workers in our area. So I'm not looking to move any money out of there right now. Supplies, we talked about an executive committee. I've kind of mentioned the last few board meetings that our supply line seems to be high. And what that represents is a lot of our COVID material supplies in our career center. So rather than stockpile in the career centers, we're kind of stockpiling in the administrative office. So financially speaking, we purchase them, they sit in our admin office, and then as each of our centers requests them, then we then move them out, and then we make financial adjustments. So we've added this line, COVID supplies, so you have a better feel for that, of what it looks like and how it's migrating. We've not fully gone through and vetted. There's a good chunk of this $6,000 here that's going to move down into this line. But Patty and I have not had time. Again, it's still very early in the month. Equipment maintenance is pretty high right now. We've had some issues with telephones and whatnot. Insurance is a big line item, and you see zero expenditures. All those bills will come due very soon. It is a timing issue. Special projects and payroll services. Payroll services is about on for this time of the year. Special projects, we may be looking to move those dollars out down into the program line, depending on how we're projecting for the year. So all in all, 42% overall in this category, running about 47%. So I'm not unhappy with where we're at, particularly knowing that a good chunk of the equipment, or not the equipment, the supplies are going to move out. So I'm pretty pleased with where we are there. In terms of one-stop expenses, again, this is the projected obligations. It looks like we're right on pace right now, which is actually a little bit low, because what you don't see here reflected in this, you see zero for Bath facility and very little on Montour and very little on Hornell. Rental leases have not been fully obligated, and we've not put those numbers into this yet. So from an obligation perspective, those numbers will go up. And so the next budget, you'll see them jump dramatically. It is not that we've actually spent that money. It's more we just have to recognize that we have a legal contract on it. So we should actually be a little bit higher than the 45% right now, quite a bit higher than the 45%. But most of that represents the timing issue of the rent catching up. Program expenditures, all in all, we're in pretty good shape here. In terms of dollar amounts, we are going to be looking, so work experiences is the youth dollars. They're plugging along, and they're actually spending, this is probably, we're approaching record expenditures on youth experiences as far as year-over-year comparisons at this point. That youth team has been very aggressive on that front, as they need to be. Contracted services, this number is actually a little bit low. Once we actually finalize the contract with the workplace, you'll see obligations jump dramatically by about $300,000 on this line. But again, those are recognizing obligations that will spread out between now and the end of September. Training and OJT, we budgeted 200. At this point, we've obligated about 176. Our goal for the year was 160. So we're approaching what looks like fully expending out this line, but we're really not quite there yet. A lot of those obligations on trainings that are still going on. We're still writing contracts, and as we move some of the things like the special projects numbers and some of the other categories above, we're going to take all those monies and push them down, and this will be one of those target lines that we do. Push money into target occupational training. We had 50,000 in our budget. We're not going to be running the tot, so that 50,000 really will get lumped down in here with the ITA line of 85, representing about 135 in that category. You can see right now we've obligated about 109, 110, but again, that is a little bit deceiving because we obligate the full amount for an ITA, but if for a person who attends, for instance, Corning Community College, and they file their FAFSA, so we might obligate a full $7,000 for tuition, but once the financial aid packages are all done and everything's paid out, it is very common for us to end up actually not paying any of the tuition after all. So it's kind of a placeholder. So this is one of those areas where I'm quite comfortable going over my budget amount just because I know the mechanics of how it's going to play out. But we also have, and further down in the budget, today, you'll see we did get, for the executive committee, you'll know I mentioned it at last week's meeting, New York State did get an emergency grant money, and they did decide to put about $4 million across the state into local training funds. So that is the excellent news that we're starting to see a trickle of money coming out of Washington and Albany in terms of helping. The bad news is apparently we didn't identify enough dislocated workers because we only got about $40,000, and I had projected, just based on historical percentages, probably 80 to maybe up to 100. So I don't know the exact formula the state used, but usually a primary driver of NEG funds in terms of the allocation distribution methodology is around dislocated workers. So my instincts tell me that we are either fortunate not to have as many dislocated workers as other areas, or we're just somehow within our system not identifying them at the same pace as the other areas. So we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit, but that's process improvement. So that TOT's going to go down to that category. That group's also going to see around $40,000 bump as well. So we're going to have lots of money in this tuition and ITA line moving forward. Supportive services, we put 25 in there. We're actually almost 14,000. I'm very, very pleased actually with the way the counselors and the youth team have been able to spend off these supportive services. These are those wraparound things like boots or books or childcare or transportation. Well, not transportation because that's a separate line. So these would be the hardcore supplies, materials, support that folks in training would need. So initially when I put 25 in this line, I was a little pie in the sky and thinking that probably some of that would need to get moved out to the ITA line or the OJT line to expend. But we're actually, the team has been very diligent at expending it out there. In the mileage reimbursement, however, we put 10,000 there. You can see we've only spent 132 to date. With so much training happening virtually like this, we're just not expending off that mileage line. So that will be an area that will probably move a goodly chunk of that either up into the OJT customized or down into the tuition in ITA line. So all in all, 42% of the way through the year. If you see on the bottom here, we're looking at about 48% total expenditures or total obligated accrued expenditures, the big number. So I'm not unhappy with that. It's actually a little bit low because again, we've got leases that need to get factored in and yeah. So, and you can't obligate any of the salaries and things the way the state defines it. So I think big picture, I'm pretty pleased with where we're at. I will apologize. This monthly snapshot is not as accurate as I want, but moving the board meeting up this soon in the month, we haven't even technically closed out November completely, like closed it out yet. So these are the best numbers we have at this time. I'll entertain lots of questions.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan? Going once, hearing none. If I could get a motion to approve, please.
Motion to approve.
Bill Connell, second.
Okay, motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on, executive committee reports. The minutes from our last two meetings were attached. If anyone has any questions or comments.
The only thing I would say in there is there was some important work done around demand occupation list strategy conversations following up from the last board meeting around the cosmetology information. And at the meeting last week, there was some good conversation around sick leave policy and vacation stuff that'll come further in today's conversation. But those are the two big note items from those meetings.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Any questions? Okay. Ernie, motion.
Jim Griffin, second.
Jim, second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Operation oversight. Those minutes were also attached for you folks. Any questions there or anything anyone wants to highlight, Dan?
Yeah, so I wanted
Judy.
to,
Yep.
yeah, a couple of items. One is, we've met twice. The notes are pretty detailed, so I won't go over them, but I will share with you that, the couple of the things that the committee is doing. One is, we're sort of looking at the metrics. And one of the things that was interesting in one of our most recent meetings, we are, of course, woefully behind when it comes to youth and our services to youth. And so one of the things that we have found is that I think it was in Steuben County, that the public defender's office, as well as, and perhaps you'll hear this a little bit later in the operations report, but churches and public defenders have been referring youth to us. And I think that that is a sign of an opportunity for us to really increase our outreach. And so the committee has talked quite a bit about that. I think the most important piece for the board to know is that the RFP for our next, for our coming years has been started. We've started working on that. We met just this past Monday to begin that process. The board can expect to see the final RFP at the April 22nd board meeting. Our goal is to have the RFP completed by the 7th and then be able to put it out right after the board accepts it and approves it in April. So we will be on time. So I think that's probably the most important piece. There is also, and you'll see this in the report, the committee did pass a recommendation that the CSS Workforce Board approve our organization going through the Ticket to Work program through NICE. So again, not sure if it belongs in this report or if Dan, it's going to come up later, but that is the committee would like the board to consider approving our organization to go through with the Ticket to Work program through NICE.
Thank you. I forgot to put that out on item, Judy, very much. Yes.
So I would like to make that motion since we're doing this before we approve the board report. I would like to make the motion if we can do it that way, that we move forward with having Dan go after the Ticket to Work program. It doesn't mean a lot of money to our organization, but it would bring us a little bit.
Let's second the motion, Tim.
Okay, specifically on this motion, any questions? All right, sounds like a good idea. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Judy. Would you also be kind enough to make a motion for approval?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the Operations and Oversight Committee reports from November the 4th and December the 2nd.
Thank you much. Second?
Jamie, I'll second it.
Okay, motion second. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Judy. Nothing you want to cover under personnel? I mean, we talked about the sick leave. That'll be later.
Yep.
Anything else, Dave?
Yeah. The only thing I would say there is we need to reconstitute our personnel committee to finish up. I know, Jeannie, you're, I think, the last survivor from our personnel task force. So we need to reconvene and reconfigure that group to complete our mission in terms of updating our manual. And I apologize to the personnel committee for moving holiday leave and sick leave through exec, but with not having this committee fully functioning, I had to do it for timing issues. So please don't think it was an end around, but we do need to reconfigure. So if there are folks that would like to kind of lend some expertise on helping us go through our policies, particularly our handbook, please feel free to volunteer because we could use, with Jeannie, assuming she wants to stay on, we'll need at least 2 more to refire up that group.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. Moving on, ITA review. Ernie or Dan, anything you want to talk about there?
I'll let Ernie have the floor.
Yeah, as you see in front of you, you've got the December report. November is pretty much, excuse me, on line with 2019. There was a slight decrease, which you really can't see in the graph, but for the most part, November is quiet anyway because you got new semester starting at the first of the year, and you know, we're still dealing with COVID zones that are affecting training. The Bush campus on Philo Road, I believe, is still in the orange zone, and Tim probably answered the question about the other BOCES facilities. Tim, are they in orange or yellow?
Cooper's is in yellow, and we're able to run some. We moved our welding class from campus to the Cooper's campus, so that we're able to continue with that. So hopefully we're going to get some new guidance, I'm hoping, before long from the state to see where else we can run classes. We do have a couple things going on at Langdon Plaza because we're, a lot of them are higher ed type classes, so we're able to run some of those. But we're getting some other ones lined up for spring, but also like HVAC and a few other classes. We are trying to do them virtually as much as possible. I know it's hard because these are all hands-on type classes and they need to actually be having their hands-on equipment and learning, but we're doing the best we can in the interim, but hopefully we'll get some new guides and be able to get back in the classroom soon.
Thanks, Tim. And that brings us down to the pie chart. As you can see that we've been inundated with barber and cosmetology. And we'll see that change very soon. We do anticipate an uptick in CDL training. We have approved a new training provider, so it'll give us a little bit more participation, especially since some of the training facilities are kind of quarantined out. And then down to tuition in supportive services. You'll see that graph there. And Phyllis, correct me if I'm wrong, the majority of the youth expenditures are due to the barbering and cosmetology.
Yes, Ernie.
All right. Now you know everything I know.
The only thing I would add to that is, so we continue to work. The New York State Department of Labor runs the ETPL, the Eligible Training Provider List, which is online, and we have we continue to work with Corning community because it appears that Corning was removed completely from the ETPL. So we continue to work through trying to get them back up and running on there. In the interim, there will be no impact on approvals. Counselors have been told that if any customer wants to go to Corning for training, to get that course to Phyllis and I, and we will figure out if they've been, we'll go through whatever meeting minutes and find whether it's been approved or not and make sure there's no impact there. But the only real impact on this, and I don't mean to minimize this at all, is really in terms of folks looking for training. Sometimes people begin their search at the New York State Department of Labor's eligible training provider list, and they won't see the college there right now. So we could lose a little bit of traffic from there, although historically that's not where most people start. Most people start working in the Career Center. So could be minimal impact, but as far as our end, we're moving. We'll accommodate our end to make sure there's no flow issues. And that's all I have for you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Dan. Any questions for the gentleman? Okay, don't need authorization for that. Moving on. Jamie, anything on I-86 you want to highlight?
No, the only thing that, and Dan, you can chime in here. The only thing I think I would like to mention is that we had a very good conversation. I don't know, about a week ago now, where the partners came together and talked about efforts to take our disengaged workers and try to re-engage them into the workforce. Dan, I don't know if you want to give any details about the conversation, but I thought it was a really good discussion that we had.
So for any of you that are kind of out there in the private sector, folks will certainly attest to this. We've had a very hard time getting folks to apply for jobs and really kind of step off the sidelines and back into the workforce. We've just struggled with it. And it's not just our area, it's bigger than our area, but there has been a struggle there. And there's a variety of factors, but the ID6 group does have a little bit of bandwidth and resources available. And so we've had our first meeting with the ID6, and they've got a consultant on their team that they've brought on, and we're going to begin looking at what those barriers are to the folks coming back. To what's preventing people from really, doing that historical reattachment to the workforce when you're on unemployment insurance. and putting together some thoughts and maybe designing some, for lack of a better word, I'll use marketing, but it's really outreach and motivational types of stuff to encourage people to reattach. As a CSS system, we're bringing to the table. So all of our frontline staff are going to kind of share their experiences and their learning from working with job seekers on the front line. We're also going to try and wrangle up some job seekers so the consultant can interview them, and hopefully we can get some sort of a data set as to what those barriers are and why people are not reattaching, and so that we can look at either trying to overcome them, or at least I'm not sure what it is, but all in all, we want to make sure, we want to identify what the barriers are, and then find ways to overcome them, and then ultimately with the strategic goal of motivating them to reattach. So get out there, apply for jobs, go to college, go to BOCES, go to, re-engage. What is the barriers, and let's get the machine working again. So that's where we're at with that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Operator report, Dan. Anything to mention there?
It's Shelley.
Yeah, so real quickly, not to belabor, but as you see, our data keeps telling us that we're seeing fewer customers, largely attributed to, obviously, the pandemic. We continue to have, we have the loss of the walk-in traffic in the career centers. Some of the mandated programs certainly fuel the business in the career center with unemployment insurance and our pathways to employment individuals. So, we are serving about 237 fewer customers than we did last year at this time. We are open for limited hours still. The hours remain the same with a capacity of 2 customers at one time, and we're limiting the amount of time in the center to 30 minutes. So compared to 2019, we're seeing about 467 customers. That's about 1,300 less. Again, the same with the adult and dislocated worker population. We're seeing fewer dislocated workers, and Dan had already mentioned that. One of the things that we're looking to do, Dan, I appreciated listening to what you were just talking about, and anything that our staff can do to help with that outreach, we're on board with that, as well as working, stepping up our collaboration with Department of Labor staff as well, to kind of anticipate, be on the cutting edge of the news of, are there extensions? How long are they going to be? How much time do we have to prepare for the flood of dislocated workers that may be coming into the center? As far as WIOA activities, again, for the month of November, only 89 activities. I don't mean to minimize it. There are some things that we are not capturing. The counselors in the center are seeing some people that aren't WIOA related, meaning they're seeing people for self-services. They're also doing a lot of virtual meetings, working with them through ITA process. So those are some things that we're starting to track. How many phone meetings are they doing? So next board meeting, we should have some additional information about those types of services that they're beginning to do virtually. Just a few other little things. We are the part-time position in Hornell. We've completed interviews and are looking to make an offer this week. So I might have an update on that very soon. Also, Phyllis, Dan, and I met with the Southeast Library, Courting Library, and we are beginning to form a relationship with them. They have graciously offered their computers, internet access, office space if they need, or room space to do virtual interviews. One of our counselors is meeting with their staff in January to bring them up to speed on our Teams platform. And we'll be able to direct customers to the library to do some of their, to meet some of their virtual needs and job search needs.
That last piece is part of an overall strategic effort that we've got going on to build a really good partnership with the libraries to overcome internet access issues for our population. So we're in Hornell. This is a great step in Corning. We have a pretty good process already set up in Elmira with the Steele Library. So we are very slowly and diligently building out relationships with the library system to increase access for our customers. Because they've got a great footprint. The library system has a tremendous footprint that we could never, it would be silly for us to even try and replicate it. So we want to build out that relationship and make them, make the libraries to the extent that those boards, respective boards, are interested and capable and whatnot. We try to be very respectful of their staffing limitations and their space limitations. And we can't just send a flood of people into a library because then they've got the sanitation issues, the same as we do in the career centers in terms of cleaning and materials and all that fun stuff. So we are very slowly, diligently building out this relationship with the library system as part of a strategic effort. So you'll probably hear not probably, almost assuredly hear future references to other libraries across the 3 counties as we build out.
Dan, did you see the Hornell Library reopened?
I did as of Monday. So I want to reach out to that board and have a sit down with them just like we did with Corning. So I'm looking forward to it. Yep.
And then just to close out, through all this times of grayness, we do have another success here. One of our counselors been working with a young man for 6 or so months. He was referred, released from prison in April of this year, and was required by his parole officer to search for work, but it could be nothing with public interaction. So, and he was set up in some housing that was supplied by Steuben County. The counselor worked diligently with him to update his resume, refer to some openings. He initially accepted a temp job with Dollar Tree and then a local pizzeria in the Steuben County area. Continued to work through the counselor. Not real satisfied with those types of positions. He was able to, he worked again with him, making some more referrals, worked on his interview skills, received an opportunity to work through StaffWorks, a temporary staffing agency, with Silgan Plastics, which I'm not real familiar with, but it's a plastic bottle packaging plant. And after 4 weeks of the temporary employment, they hired him on permanently. So that was quite an effort by our counselor to really get him, to keep him engaged. But he also commented, the counselor commented that the young man was also very interested in making some improvements to his life. So we're pleased with that.
Thanks, Shelley. Always good to hear, those success stories. I know there are plenty of them, but always good to hear, those examples. Great report. Thank you. Any questions for Shelley? Okay. Thank you very much. If not, moving on. Dan, the schedule for next year.
Yep. So this came in your meeting supplies. We will also, I'll have Melissa send out a PDF copy to everybody. So this is our board meeting calendar for next year. The board meeting is going to continue with every other month, even months. Fourth Thursday, with the exception of December, which moves up to the 2nd to avoid holiday interruptions. Executive committee's calendar is going to follow the first Thursday of the month. Operations and oversight first Wednesday. The audit committee, they kind of meet as needed. So Drew and Nancy on those fronts, and personnel committee we need to reconfigure, but that will also be a meeting by meeting basis. So this is our annual calendar for the year. Yeah, so watch you already have a copy, but Mel will also send additional copies to everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Grant update, Dan.
Yeah, this is the emergency grant I spoke about earlier. New York State applied some time ago early in the pandemic for about $50 million through the US DOL's ETA. Washington did not fund New York's $50 million request. Instead, they gave them $12 million. Albany was trying to figure out what they were going to do with it, how they wanted to roll the monies out. I will say, well, it doesn't matter what I say. Bottom line, that the state decided, Albany decided, and I think rightly decided, that's my personal opinion, to take some of the money and roll it out to the local areas to support training efforts, rather than try and set up and run a training program out of Albany itself. So based on the proportional share, New York City always gets at least half of the money. My guess with their downturn, they probably actually ate up more than half. But our proportional share of this is about 36,000. Well, not about 36,841.33, and we'll be pumping that into, because it's dislocated workers. It will primarily go into our ITA line, and it is pure training. ETPL updates. I talked about the snafus that we're having with Corning being deleted from the list. We're working to get that going again. We've had a couple of recent new additions. I think Ernie mentioned it. On some of our training providers, the CDL out of Canandaigua and CDL out of Canandaigua Driving School. The business services report is this here. So you can kind of see where our OJTs are being written. We continue to have a really good flow on them. If they're notated in red on the screen, that means the person started in their OJT. However, for whatever reason, they did not make it through their OJT, which usually means that it wasn't a good fit at the employer, which means we're not liable. We don't pay any of those dollars. So you can see we had obligated, and then some of them fell through. So 58,000 is what we've wrote contracts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 10. So we've put about 48,000 so far into OJT line. We are moving, if you look here in this far right column, we are moving a fair number of dislocated workers on this front. So you see also this is a major growth in this business. So when you see clumps of them like that, that usually means that business is going through a growth spurt, and we're kind of supporting their acquisition. So you see them from time to time come through. You've seen a lot last year with TTA. They had a growth spurt. John Mills Electric was looking to add. So Boss Security absorbed. For those of you that are familiar with the company Endeavor, we used to use them for IT. Boss Security and Automation purchased a piece of Endeavor and migrated those folks from general IT into the manufacturing and security world with Boss Security. So when you see those types of clumps, that usually means the business is growing. Customized trainings, we still continue to see a pretty good number. However, it is slowed down. End of the year, it always slows down as our business sector looks at the end of the year, and they're either in retail and they're too busy trying to handle the retail rush, or they're in manufacturing. It's the end of the year and they're trying to do inventory. Whatever that looks like. Usually November and December are slow on the customized front. And we would anticipate after the first of the year, usually mid to late January and starting in February, businesses kind of re-engage on their training front. So there's not been a lot of growth on customized training since the last report, but that's normal. We do expect to see a bunch more in the spring. So that's our business services report, where it's going in terms of those two training streams.
Okay. Any questions on that business services for Dan, or anything else? Okay, if not, sick leave, had a long discussion on this at exec. You want to tee it up, Dan, or you want me to?
Yeah, well, everyone should be aware that in New York State, there's now mandatory paid sick leave, and it's pretty it's prescriptive in terms of the legislation and stuff. So our sick leave policy did not meet the new New York State regs. So We presented to exec what it would take to kind of for us to be compliant. For those of you that are in the field or have rewritten your own policies, you'll recognize most of the language. We adopted a goodly piece of it just from the regs. So employees want 40 hours of paid sick leave. That comes from the legislation. We're in that category. We're required to do 40 hours. Regular full-time employees will accrue 40 hours in a lump sum on January 1. That's historically matches how we've accrued with our full-time regular employees. As an agency, our part-timers and our temps will accrue 1 hour per 30 hours worked. The sick leave definition of what it can be used for comes out of the legislation and the regulations. The same way with all of the other activities. Permissible lines with permissible uses does not include bereavement. We do have a separate bereavement policy, which is not impacted. This did impact in terms of definition of family member. Our definition in the past did not historically line up with this, so there's some changes there. The executive committee did recommend that we allow the employees to use paid sick leave in no less than 1 hour increments. And beyond that, it is really based out of the legislation. So the net loss on the paid sick leave, however, so we gave a little bit more time in paid sick leave in the past to our employees than what the 40 hours under the law requires. There was a lot of conversation about what to do with that. The end suggestion from the exec committee was that we added in as floating holidays. So you see additional floating holidays. We had 2 in there. There were 3 sick days that were gone, so that by moving it over, it moves this to 5. Otherwise, the paid holiday calendar remains the same, just adding additional floating holidays. So we would need a motion. We can certainly have conversation, but ultimately we'll be looking to have a motion to accept and amend our paid sick leave policies and our holiday policies to accommodate those decisions. And then from there, Jack, I'll let you talk about the nitty-gritty or field questions as to the thought.
Yeah, no, that was a description, Dan. I appreciate it. Obviously a change required by law, but the discussion and the rest of the folks on exec, I don't want to speak for you, so please, chime in if I get it wrong, but it seemed like, at least personal opinion, we didn't want to, harm the employees or have them experience a net loss in days allocated because of this change. And that's why I think it was Ernie and Judy's recommendation to do floating holidays. So, this way they're at least kept whole in terms of, leave that has historically been granted, but it also brings us in line with the state requirements. So I think anything else from exec members that I missed?
No, you got it.
No,
All right.
you got it. Yep.
Dan, this is Julie.
Okay.
Can you float back down to the holidays? I wanted to see that again. I'm sorry, I didn't.
The paid holidays, sure.
Yeah, please. So I know that the governor last year created a new state holiday.
Juneteenth.
Yes, Juneteenth, and I don't see that there. Are you planning to not?
That only applies to state employees, Jeannie.
Yeah, I just know that the college is also adding it into our holiday schedule. So I'm just asking. It doesn't need to be asking.
To be honest with you, it was something that I had been meaning to suggest. We have had, in terms of the conversations over the summer, in particular, the around equity and inclusion and whatnot. There was some conversation at our staff level and our contractor staff level around the possibility of the board approving a Juneteenth holiday. I'm certainly not opposed to it. We just, in terms of this conversation, the moving of the sick into the bucket of paid holiday sort of, it happened really quick in the conversation, and we didn't get around to that. But my thought would be if we want to do that, if the board feels that's an important statement to make, then we could, in terms of keeping things net, we could just add Juneteenth and move it to 4 floating holidays, and then there's no additional time off. We just direct it that way. So now would be a great time to do it, because as we're looking at setting our calendars for next year, that would be something. So I don't know. I'll throw it out to Jack and the full board for conversation. Do we want to do that as a board, as a system?
Yeah, I'd open it up to the board for discussion if we want to list that in the paid holidays and then reduce the floating holidays by one.
My opinion, this is AJ. My opinion is that because there's so many floating holidays, I think that would be an appropriate one to add into the schedule, but just my opinion.
Okay.
And this is me again. I would agree with that. I mean, I think that makes sense.
All right. Yeah. No objections on my end personally. Anyone else feel strongly one way or the other about it? If not, then I guess it would be looking for a motion to approve the sick leave, amended sick leave policy with that change. So the final would have Juneteenth listed with 4 floating holidays.
Correct.
This is Margaret. I'll move it.
Margaret, motion. Do we have a second? AJ second. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Jack, this is Jamie. I'm going to abstain because it deals with personnel matters.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Jamie. All right, 1 abstention. If not, carries. Okay. Moving on, Dan, the BLS data set.
So I don't know if folks that want to kind of stay around. So I shared out a BLS employment projections. We can, in terms of the information, so Bureau of Labor Statistics offered up this update. A couple of things, this talks about them. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics had released their 2019 to 2029 projections on schedule. This past year, 2020, whoops, sorry, there we go. They were finalized in the spring of 2020, and I don't know if folks remember, but in the spring of 2020, the macro economic world around us shifted a little bit. And so in order to accommodate this, BLS was getting tremendous numbers of requests for updates on data and how the pandemic and this downturn is going to impact us and the projections. And so what they did was BLS did not have the capability, the money, the time, the whatever to do a complete rewrite of their projections based on pandemic impacts. What they did, however, is recognize that there was a strong customer demand for information. And so what they did is they built 2 scenarios, a moderate and a strong impact. And they incorporated it based on certain categories. So this is kind of like 2019 B data, if you will. So 2019 A and 2019 B. This is kind of a little mid-season update, which is not their normal model, but given what was going on, they felt it was important to get it out there. When they do their 2020 to 2030 projections, they will do a more comprehensive snapshot on this. But they just did not have the time and resources to do it in the short term. So again, they did a moderate and a strong impact. What they targeted on was the occupations and industries that were going to have increased uncertainty because of the pandemic. So the data set is limited to just those areas. I'm not exactly sure what this was, and truthfully, I didn't understand what he was trying to say with it. So I'll just plead incompetence on that slide. Impact. So what BLS tried to do is incorporate 4 factors into their data sets. And these are the 4 factors that they've kind of narrowed it down in this midstream. The fact that we're working increasingly remotely, the fact that there's an e-commerce uptick and a corresponding downtick in brick and mortar. They also targeted that there's increased medical research activities going on, as well as a dramatic decrease in spending on leisure and hospitality. And this was most pronounced in their strong impact scenario. So if you are part of an industry, or you have your economic area has leisure and hospitality, travel, tourism as a component, you probably will want to be looking at strong impact scenarios nationally. This is all national data. All right. These things, they recognize them as potential, but given their limited time frame and whatnot, they did not incorporate them this time around. So the reshoring of manufacturing, the impacts of additional automation, as well as the altered labor force participation, and that's kind of a nice way of saying the fact that we're having more and more people on the sidelines instead of jumping into the labor force. So bottom line, in this scenario, how to read this chart, 0 is their baseline. So this was the original 2019, 2029 projections. So that's the 0 line. So moderate impact scenario. So, you know, their definition of moderate was, you know, we'd get a vaccine fairly soon. It would be effective. It would be enough to overcome, you know, the worst effects of the pandemic, and kind of you begin seeing people return to some type of historical normal type of activities. Strong impact really is we're going to continue to see the effect of this pandemic for a long time because there's been some real serious structural impact from the pandemic. So areas that in industries that are going to be impacted, both moderate, some of that is fairly obvious: accommodation, food service, arts, entertainment, recreation, retail, construction. You can see those are big hits. Interestingly enough, they also note down here on the bottom 2 areas that are seeing actual positive impacts, if you will, from a growth or industry perspective. And that's the information, the IT sectors, as well as this professional, scientific, technical services. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So looking at some of the impacts on construction, what they noted was when you look at construction nationally, you get a number here. When you then break it down and you do different types of construction, so residential, you actually see residential construction, interestingly enough, is seeing some positive upward. Well, in a moderate impact scenario, you're seeing positive upward. You're seeing less of an impact in a sharp thing, although it's dropped from the initial, but it's still fairly positive in terms of growth. The opposite is true if we look at non-residential. You see, no matter which, whether it's a moderate impact or a strong impact, you see tremendous downturns in that sector. So that would be building, you know, all sorts of shopping centers and commercial buildings and office space and stuff like that. So that's where they're projecting within that industry. Another one would be looking at transportation. And again, if you look at different types of transportation, the baseline for transit and ground was really a nice 5.3 up. In a moderate scenario, you still see 2.9, which is pretty respectable increases. However, in a severe, you could see some real impacts on that transit and ground transportation sector. If you look at air, you can see that the strong impact is going to do it's going to hurt the air transportation long term. So if you're looking at our local airport, our regional airport, you're going to look at that. If you're a manufacturer, perhaps in the transit and ground transportation, you might want to be looking and paying attention to data sets here. This is where it gets really, from a national perspective, a little grim. When you start breaking down that retail, leisure, hospitality into its some component pieces, overall retail trade was expected to drop. I mean, we saw brick and mortar being impacted by the transition to e-commerce. Everybody knew that. We've seen that. The pandemic has accelerated that. Food services and drinking establishments, baseline, you're looking for some pretty respectable growth in there. This pandemic has either nullified it or really turned it around long term. And this is over a 10-year projection. So this is not like right now. This is over the next 10 years. This is the impact on that industry sector. Traveler accommodations, nominally 0, but traveler accommodation is an area that's going to get clobbered over the next 10 years, or they're projecting to be clobbered. Food service occupations, it doesn't get much better here. Bartenders, waiters, waitresses, hostesses, restaurant, lounge, coffee shops, nationally over the next 10 years in terms of occupations. We're going to have to build this information into things like demand occupation lists, labor market information, career guidance. What I want to, before what I've told the counselors on staff is, these are national numbers. These are not our local numbers, and we're going to have to figure out what that means locally and what's the nuanced statement. So I'm not in a position where I would dare ever step out and tell any of my kids or any of the kids that we work with, you know, don't go into food service occupations because there's no history or there's no future in it, because I just would never say that. Too much of our economy is built on that. But I think we do have to recognize nationally there is some of this going on, and make some intelligent and intentional statements and realistic things locally. Interestingly enough, however, if you're digging down deeper into it, you see if you're fast food and counter workers, the growth did not disappear for those industries. They're projecting it's just takeout. I mean, if people still need to answer the phones and take the orders, people need to work online and take the orders off the website. People still need to walk it out to the car to do, you know, touchless delivery or whatever. So those types of careers at this point, based on their projections, are still holding impacted, but still holding pretty solid. But again, shifting back to when everything is takeout, you got less dishes to do. And then overall, they're projecting a decline in terms of occupations of food preparation workers. So as an industry, as an occupation, they are projecting some downward trending on that as people migrate more to eating at home or in smaller groups. Clerical sales types of positions, the trend is equally grim. You can see how this goes. Cashiers, reservation, ticket clerks, receptionists, hotel, motel, resort desk clerks. Looking at 10-year projections, the number of occupations and openings in those occupations look to be dropping pretty dramatically. On the bright side, if you're in the medical research field, in these things, double or triple growth in those occupations. If you're in pharmaceutical or medicine manufacturing, look at, 4 to 5 times, probably 4 times growth. Or if you're in related industries. So for instance, we do have in our background Corning Incorporated. They do produce the medical vials for a lot of these vaccines and whatnot that are going out. So they could maybe be lumped into this. So you could see some long-term impacts on those types of medicine and medicine-related manufacturing. And conversely, this is the research and development of particularly life sciences. So those people doing the raw research into the vaccines and related types of things. Epidemiologists, medical scientists, biochemists, biophysicists, biological technicians, while they were all projected to grow, this has really kind of kicked those growth trajectories into high gear across the board. IT occupations is another one. And it really is, it's really across the board. Everything from web development to network administration to cybersecurity. What was projected to grow is at the very least growing by 40, 50%, if not more, projecting anyways over the next 10 years. And if you see on here, that's regardless of whether it's a moderate or a severe impact. It's just recognizing plain and simple, these are going to grow and you're going to grow a lot faster. Occupational groups, I'm not going to get into too much of this again. You can see it in a different type of chart here. And again, down here, you see not aberration, but in terms of the chart, the real anomalies, but difference between that section and that section right there. There's additional employment projection sites. So that's the data. That's what I had, and I thought it was pretty important, and I thought there might be worthwhile conversation at a board level around what this means, and if there's anything that the board wants to take strategically related to it. So I will, Jack, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions for Dan? Helpful information from the macro perspective, so thank you.
Okay.
Anything else that Dan, staff, the board want to bring up? If not, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion,
Bill Cottle, second.
second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carried. Thank you all, and everyone have great holidays. And, in the grand scheme of things, hopefully everyone's safe and healthy and have enjoyable holidays.
You too.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.